For those just joining us, this is Tim Barnett, Alan Shlemon, and Jonathan Noyes. You prefer John or Jonathan?
Either one. John normally.
Yeah, I just call you John, but like formally,
Whatever
when you're
you're
out on the
Tim, whatever you're comfortable with, man. I'm just
okay,
happy to be called anything by you.
okay, okay.
I like how you said for those just joining us, as if we've been on for like an hour.
Yeah, we are
We
live
literally
tonight.
just
Yeah, we're doing the STR book club. We're on session 5. So if you're just tuning in and you don't know what this is about, you've missed a lot of material. Okay.
yeah.
We have covered at this point 12 chapters into the book Tactics by Greg Koukl, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. This little guy right here, actually, it's not a little guy anymore. Now with the updated version, we're talking 270 pages, and it's good stuff. So we've been going through that. Session 5, we're going to do chapters 13 to 15, God willing, and then next week will be our last session. We'll just close out the book. I don't know how many chapters are left, but we'll finish it next Sunday night. So
It worked out perfectly, Tim. There's 4 more chapters.
I think though lengthwise, I think that's what we originally when we looked through, we wanted to make sure people were reading kind of around the same length every week. So this worked out pretty well. So we're doing this book club, and again, this isn't. I mean, I've never really been a part of official book club before. We're not reading the book together. We're hoping that you guys do that on your own. We're just talking about the chapters, things we found useful, things we liked, maybe some things we didn't like, or maybe have disagreement on, and maybe sharing some stories and how we've used some of these tactics, this kind of thing. So it's been, for me at least, it's been really beneficial, and hopefully it has been for you guys who are listening. Remember, if you have any questions for us as we're going through this, we want you to be a part of it. So just leave your comment in the chat there. It eventually comes up on our program here. There's a little bit of a delay, and we'll try and follow along with those. And if we see it, we'll bring it in and maybe toss that question around. So let's maybe we'll get into it. Chapter 13, taking the roof off. Which, Alan, would you say this is your favorite tactic?
It is.
Honestly, I think I was at Summit Ministries. We were, the way Summit works, they'll bring in a speaker and then another guy comes in for the next day, but he maybe gets to see the other speaker. So for whatever reason, I was there when you were there, and I got to catch one of your sessions. You were doing tactics. And I typically in my session don't do taking the roof off. I do Columbo 1 and 2. A couple other things, and I just don't go that far. Typically, you were doing a more advanced kind of lesson. I think it may even been longer than 45 minutes, or maybe it was a double session or something. And you got into taking the roof off, and I thought, man, this is gold. Like, this is good stuff. Especially be training young people on this. And I think I remember you even saying, this is my favorite part of the whole tactics material. So maybe we'll kick it off with throw the ball to you and tell us what you thought, what you like about this particular tactic, maybe how you use it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it is my favorite. And I think I mentioned this last week that I wrote an article called 2 Tactics to Rule Them All. And I said, if you know taking the roof off and the suicide tactic, if you just know those 2 tactics, you can probably identify, or you can probably recognize the vast majority of mistaken arguments or objections raised against Christianity can be determined to fall apart, basically, either by using taking the roof off or suicide tactic. But I think, for whatever reason, I think taking the roof off is a much simpler concept to kind of wrap my mind around than a self-refuting, than of course a suicide tactic. And I think it's just because sometimes it's hard to see something as self-refuting, especially when it gets more complicated than just there is no truth. So I think that's the reason why I love Taking the Roof Off, because it's easy to kind of just say, all right, let me see what you're thinking. Let me see if your thinking makes sense. Does it lead to anything absurd? Oh, yeah, it does, So anyways, that's why I love it. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was just right at the beginning there, page 180, when Greg starts talking about Francis Schaeffer. And I love Schaeffer. And I love the point Schaeffer makes about how no matter whether you believe in God or not, whether you're a Christian or not, we all have to live in God's world, right? We all, even if you don't agree with theism, we still live in a world where God exists. And he talks about how reality oftentimes confronts non-theists or atheists, and it creates a point of tension. And so what people do is they create a roof to kind of shield them from that tension, from that inconsistency with their view and the reality that God has. And so, of course, Greg talks about how Schaeffer says that what we want to do as Christians is lovingly, key point, take the roof off, like take their inconsistency off and let the reality of God's truth kind of beat down on their head and show their inconsistency for what it is, lovingly and graciously, of course,
Of course.
Anyways, if you don't know, by the way, I would say that a lot of who Greg is and a lot of the DNA of STR is based on Francis Schaeffer's influence. Like Schaeffer has influenced Greg Koukl a ton. And I think probably us three as well. But, Greg started Stand to Reason partly because he was so influenced by Schaeffer and his thinking. And I think that's helped him become the real clear thinker that he is. So Schaeffer's all over everything STR, this book and all that stuff like that. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I really like that part, page 180. The only thing I was going to say other than that was, after he teaches Taking the Roof Off, he gives two examples to kick it off. Now, the two examples he uses are, Mother Teresa saying Jesus would forgive, so don't therefore implement capital punishment. And then the same-sex marriage thing and interracial marriage thing. Now, if I was writing the book, well, if I was, the book probably wouldn't be as good. But if I was to write the book, I would not have chosen those two examples to sort of illustrate the tactic at the beginning. Like those two actually, I don't think are super simple. I would have done something simple like, I can't believe in the Bible because it's written by men. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. Dictionaries are written by men. History books are written by men. The DMV manual is written by men. I would have chosen something super simple and straightforward. But because in fact, when I teach on this, after I've taught the entire Taking the Roof Off and I've had the class participate with me and done a group exercise or whatever, at the end, I throw in two difficult ones. And one of them is, Mother Teresa's statement about Jesus would forgive, because I don't think most people catch that. In fact, maybe a quarter of the audience will figure out how you can take the roof off with that particular tactic. But Greg just jumped right in. That's his first one. I'm like, what? So anyways, I think pedagogically, I would not have gone in that direction right off the bat. I would have saved it for later. But that's probably why this is a bestseller, because I didn't write it.
You're not alone there, Alan. I wrote this is not easy. When I read that, I put a little mark on my note page here and said this was not an easy one to spot. Compared to some others. Of course, when Greg lays it out, you're like, okay, light bulb goes on. But that's a really good point, John. What do you think of chapter 13? What are the takeaways for you?
I'm like Alan. I really like this tactic. It's one I've used a lot. It's actually probably the tactic that I enjoy teaching the most, because it's something that we already do intuitively. Yeah. So, I don't know where I got the example from, but I'm sure I got it from Greg or something that, I point out two examples when I teach it, just launching into it. One is I use the example of your parents saying, "Hey, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you?" So. And I think I have really fun graphics when I do it, and I always grab the audience, because I'll say, "Oh, well, since when did you start smoking?" And well, all my friends are doing it. Why'd you start smoking? All my friends are doing it. Well, would you jump off a cliff if your friends did? That's a perfect example, very simple of taking the roof off. Way more simple, more simple than Mother Teresa and capital punishment for sure.
Yeah.
And then I also really like the example in, and I think he mentions it in the book, but he goes to Jesus on this.
Yeah.
And I love it when I get new insight into what Scripture teaches, because I've read the passage in Matthew 12 with Jesus taking the roof off with his audience, and but when you understand the tactic, it really helped see what Jesus was doing. They're saying to him, you're casting out demons by demons, or Satan, right? And Jesus takes the roof off. He's like, yeah, but can Satan take away Satan or whatever? I mean, a house divided among itself,
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that he brought Scripture into it, and kind of helped us learn more about Jesus and how Jesus was very tactful.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Tactful? No. It is now.
I like it.
I'm going to start using that. And I expect that if you guys start using that, you have to say, as John Noyes says, tactful. It's just cool because Jesus used this. And anytime we can imitate Jesus, it's usually a good thing. By usual, I mean always.
Yeah.
So, but it's a good chapter. Something struck me right at the very beginning of the chapter, actually, if I can find it really quickly. It was right by where you were talking. What was that, 180? I loved how, and you pointed this out, Alan, I loved how he borrows from Schaeffer, and he says, we live in God's world. Whether or not you believe in God or not, that's not really the issue, because God exists.
Yeah.
And that's almost a presuppositional stance. And sometimes I like working those types of things into my conversations with people, because I feel like as Christians, sometimes we feel like it goes back to what we've been talking before. We feel like we have to bear the burden of proof. Like we have all this legwork to do. We got to hold up Jesus, and we got to say, well, no, you live in the world that God created. You live in a world of moral realism. You live in a world of creation. You live in a world of design.
Yeah.
Now you explain to me how your worldview can explain these things. And by the way, don't borrow from my worldview, please. And I just really like whenever I'm a kind of a direct guy, so I like it when things are a little bit more direct,
Really?
and that like this was like really, really direct, that point of tension that Schaeffer talks about, those, and Greg calls them bumps in the reality, where we bump in the reality, and taking the roof off is a great and simple way for us to come alongside our loved ones, our friends, our coworkers, and show them that they're living in a world that is designed by God, that's created by God.
Yeah.
Anyways, I enjoyed the chapter.
John, are you saying that they're stealing from God?
I mean, some people like Frank Turek would say that. I'm not necessarily saying that, but maybe they're stealing. Yes, they're stealing. I actually have that book right over there. Yes, they're stealing from God.
Yeah.
Frank's a kind of a direct guy too.
Frank's a direct guy.
So I can appreciate that.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Tim, what did you think about this chapter?
Well, I mean, I'm with you both. There was so much good meat in here. I could have chewed on it all day. The Schaeffer stuff, Greg, I think, summarizes. He says, deep inside each of us lives a common sense realist, right? And that's what you were both just saying. Whether it's moral realism or, there's so many different things we can tap into when we're having our conversations. And that's what this tactic trades on. You're hoping that the person can put those pieces together. I really like actually the illustration that, and I've used it many times. The idea, he starts by opening the chapter talking about a worldview and how a worldview is like a map, like a geographical map, right? And it's someone's ideas of what the world's really like. And so a map has, you know, your roads mapped out, your rivers, all that stuff. And if you want to get to where you're going, then the map has to correspond, has to kind of overlay with reality, with the way the world is. If you get a bad map, you're going to get lost, and there's consequences. And so this is a really good illustration, I think, because, you know, we all have our worldview map, and we're all trying to navigate this world. And there's many people who, you know, have the wrong worldview. They got the wrong map. So it doesn't work, and they're going to arrive at strange destinations, how Greg puts it, and we can point that out. And so here's just one example. I was at a high school, at a Catholic high school. I was invited in, and the majority of the students were atheists. And I may have talked about this in one of our other episodes. And I gave a talk on the problem of evil to a group of, I think they were grade 10 students. And one of the Christian students left, went and got his atheist friend who was a senior, brought him to me and said, you got to talk to this, you know, you got to talk to this apologist. And he said, and immediately this atheist said, oh, so you believe in objective morality? I don't, you know, this kind of idea. And
Right.
so I asked him, so you're a relativist. You don't believe in right and wrong, good and evil. He's like, no, not objectively. I think we all determine our own right and wrong. I said, okay, what happens if? So now I'm going to see if this guy really wants to, I'm going to take his worldview, as Greg would say, for a test drive. I said,
Right.
what happens if someone breaks into your house? And let's say, I asked him if he had a mom and a sister, and he did. And so it worked out well for the illustration. They broke, and they hurt your mom and your sister. You know, they rape your mom and your sister, and then they brutally murder them. Now, do you think what he did was objectively wrong? Now, you could see like the wheels were spinning in his mind. Actually, I'm writing about this because you could see how he didn't want to say that he wanted to say it was objectively wrong, but he didn't want to give me the satisfaction, you know? And it turned out as we went down that road, he knew that objective morality, the best explanation for that is God, grounded in God. He knew that. He told me that. And so rather than pay the price tag of God's existence, he bit the bullet and said, no, there's no objective morality. And so he was willing to say that all kinds of things, and I listed off a number of other examples, and each one I brought up, he said, no, that's not really evil. That's not really wrong. And so I just here's his worldview, and he couldn't say that anything was really wrong. So I, you know, as Greg would say, you adopt the view and then show the implications, and the implications were horrifying. And the people in our group, and this is another thing Greg points out. Actually, I don't know if it's in this chapter or not, but he says that oftentimes the person it's like ricochet evangelism. You're not actually communicating. You may not be effective with the person you're talking to, but there may be others. It bounces off their hard heart and hits a soft heart, you know, in the vicinity or something like that. And that's, I think, what was going on there, because there was a group of us. I'm happy to one-on-one conversation, but there's a group of students around. And they really, I mean, they couldn't believe that this kid was saying that he would not call these things evil. They were like speechless. And so it showed where that worldview leads. So I'm a huge fan of this tactic, as both of you had alluded to. This is one of our go-to moves. Okay.
I feel like that leads into actually the next, what you were saying, and this guy that you're talking to kind of leads into the next chapter. I don't know if we're ready to go there.
Yeah, I'm ready. Unless you, Alan, do you want to say anything else about this chapter before we move on?
It is Alan's favorite chapter. I don't want to rob your joy.
That's okay. Fine. Let's keep going. Whatever.
Steamrolling it.
Sure.
Yeah, steamroll me. Whatever.
So
move on.
But
Yeah.
I thought it,
Go
like
for
what
it,
you were
John.
saying, whenever I run into stuff like that, where people are clearly willing to say um, pretty off the wall or absurd things, my mind immediately goes to the fact that number one, they probably don't believe they probably don't really believe what they're saying. So there's either one, like a cognitive dissonance that's happening, or two, they have other reasons not to believe the things that that they're saying. And for me, and in my experience, a lot of it has to do with emotions, and that's what Greg kind of talks about in this next chapter. Well, a little bit in the steamroller chapter. It doesn't have to do with the steamroller tactic, like slowing people down and stuff. But I think it's important. What I took away from this chapter, the steamrolling chapter, is people often don't believe. It isn't always. Oh man, how do I say it? Like that makes sense. It's not a lack of evidence, that why people aren't believing stuff. There's oftentimes emotional components, and as we all know, emotions can be very powerful. So and I think Greg uses these examples in the book. I don't remember, like, a bad experience in the church. I mean, I have so many friends who it's interesting. They're former Christians, now atheists, and after talking to them, I can tell that they don't believe. It's not a lack of evidence. Their decision to leave the church is almost entirely emotional, because they had awful experiences either with the church directly or Christians in general.
Yeah.
And I like that. I just like that Greg took a little bit of time to talk about that, because I think it's really important that I always try to keep that in mind. So scripture reigns supreme, right? And Paul says that people suppress the truth in unrighteousness, right? We're children of wrath, and we're unable to comprehend the things of God until the Holy Spirit renews us. I mean, that's what I believe, and so when we go into a conversation like this, like I lead with my heart, because I love people and I love Jesus, and I know the transforming power of Jesus, and I want everybody I know to know what I know and know who I know, because I know him. I know Jesus as I know my wife. He's that real to me, and I wish everybody could feel that way, but not everybody has that opportunity. So when I'm talking to somebody, what I'm saying is that when I'm talking to somebody, I have these things in mind, because oftentimes I can frustrate myself by giving people every evidence under the sun, and they still don't believe, especially with somebody you really love, like my mom or my brother or my sister. I really love them, and I really want them to come to Christ. And I've given them I've been a Christian for 13 years, and I've given them all this knowledge that I have, and I've given them all the evidence, and they still refuse to believe. Well, I don't think it's on a basis of lack of evidence. It's an emotional, spiritual thing. So anyways, that was the most significant part of this chapter. And I think it was true of that gentleman that you were talking to, Tim, probably. Yeah. If you're willing to say that rape isn't objectively wrong, then you've got something seriously wrong going on in you, and you should get some help. Or you're willing to say just about anything because you don't like the implications of a worldview that entails an objective morality, mainly because it needs an objective standard giver.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Here's I'm just checking out the chat here, because we've been talking about the arguments that.
That is an awesome picture.
When arguments don't
into Elma Fudd.
When arguments don't work, here's Pine Creek Doug. He says, almost entirely emotional. I guess this is a quote from you, or maybe from the book. I'm not sure. What if a non-Christian were to say, this is why most Christians become Christians? What do you guys think of that? So, you have Greg cites 4 reasons for resistance to Christianity. He says rational reasons, emotional reasons, prejudice reasons, and then he just says straight up rebellion, pig-headedness, I think maybe is how he put it. And so, I can jump in here with my thoughts first. I think there are Christians that are Christians for emotional reasons.
Yeah.
That's not under
Dispute?
question, dispute. Yeah. There are plenty out there. So there are some that are Christians for rational reasons, and there are some maybe even for pig-headed reasons too. And so you could kind of go through it. Necessarily, I guess it wouldn't be rebellion, but it would maybe show itself as like this kind of attitude, or maybe it's better if that would fall under prejudice. But so these aren't just common reasons for non-Christians, resistance from non-Christians. There are these kinds of reasons that show themselves even in the Christian community. What do you guys think about that?
Tim, I would just add that I think you're right. There are some Christians that probably become Christian because of emotional reasons, but that in itself doesn't show that Christianity is false, right? They may have come to Christ because of emotional reasons, but that doesn't mean that Christianity is false. In other words, it's like a genetic fallacy that you would have to show that Christianity is false before it makes sense to then ask, well, why did they become a Christian if Christianity isn't really true? Yeah. So I don't know if that's where that guy was going with the comment, like, oh, well, a lot of people just become Christian because of emotional reasons. First of all, it might be overstatement to say most become Christians that way. Yeah. But even if that's the case, so what? I mean, some people might come to Christ because they needed a crutch. Okay. Yeah. Maybe they were addicted to some substance and they totally use Christ as a crutch to help them overcome that. Okay. Yeah. So what? Even if 99% of all people came to Christ that way, that in itself wouldn't show that Christianity is false. I mean, yeah. So what? I can't remember the way Greg put this. I think it was in staff meeting. Maybe you guys can remember, but he said something like, when someone tells him that Christianity is just a crutch, he says, yeah, that's because we're crippled and crippled people need a crutch, and Christ is an appropriate support for those people who are crippled, like that. I don't know. He said something really witty and clever sounding when he said it at staff meeting, but
sure.
He moved towards the objection. In other words, yeah, so what if people come for emotional reasons? So what if people come to Christ and become Christians because they needed a crutch or whatever? That in itself doesn't show Christianity to be true or false. Right. So I just make that distinction based on what you were saying there.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. And so, I typically, the steamroller tactic, for the most part, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' comments on this. Do you find that you have to use this very often? I find that people are, generally pretty sweet. And I've never had to, I don't think I've ever had to go to step 3 where I had to leave somebody, where they were overbearing or something like that. There are times when you certainly, are having a heated, discussion, or maybe the word is excited discussion, and people want to kind of get their point across. So, you have to lay the ground rules out. Let me finish or I'll let you finish if you let me respond, this kind of idea. Have you guys had to use this tactic before? If so, what was that like?
I was going to say, Tim, you should probably talk on homosexuality more. Then you'll get to use it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I know. Actually, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of being serious. I guess there's a lot of topics that can get really emotional, and people, when they get emotional, sometimes let their emotions take control of how they behave. I mean, even for myself, I'm not saying I'm exempt from that, but it's really hard to have a thoughtful, long, vigorous discussion about homosexuality, for example, without people just relying on sound bites or, not taking the time to kind of nuance certain ideas. And so, I'd say generally it's true. I don't use it a ton, but when I have used it, I've only had to use the first step.
Yeah.
And just to say somebody, oh, wait, hold on, just let me finish. I promise to let you, jump in and say whatever you want. I've said that a lot, and that usually has, solved the problem of the person just kind of constantly jumping in and constantly interrupting me, or just kind of throwing in another objection that's tangentially related, but not really on point. The one thing I was going to say about this is that steamroller really is a form of, or a subcategory of narrating the debate, right? Actually, I mean, it only occurred to me when I was reading it this time around, but I was like, wait, this is kind of like narrating the debate, where you have to say, hold on a second, wait a minute. You asked a good question. I'm trying to answer the question, but every time I try to answer the question, you jump in and level another objection, or you change the subject. So is it okay if I just finish my point and then I'll let you jump in and you can offer your point and I'll happily listen? Like, that's in a sense a form of narrating the debate. Now, did Greg talk about narrating the debate? Was that one of the tactics? I'm trying to remember, or did we just talk about it?
No, we've covered it. It was one of the chapters.
Yeah. So anyways, I just thought that was kind of interesting, that really it's sort of like there's some similar material there kind of covering it.
That's good.
Oh, I've never had to go as far as shaming, like shaming somebody and then leaving. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff to pull from this tactic, though, as far as slowing things down. And leading also with that's what I meant by like my last comments. Leading in the conversation with I guess a charitable mindset, and then also an understanding. It relates kind of back to what we were saying before, with an understanding of the way the world is, that the Christian worldview is true, and knowing this, it helps us lead in a conversation, and we're talking to a person made in the image of God, of indescribable worth and value. And so if people are getting, or somebody's getting uppity in the middle of a conversation, if you can have the mindset, like what Alan was just saying, to kind of slow things down and say, whoa, I'll get to that in a second. If we can just, let's clarify what we're talking about first here on, and then we can move on to something else. And like everything else, it takes a lot of practice, and it also takes two. So I guess in one sense, while I've never like shamed anybody or just said goodbye, I definitely have ended a conversation before, and just said, we're not moving ground at all. Right. We're staying in the same spot. So why don't we pick this up again some other time? But I like the idea of trying to slow everything down and talking to people as if they're people.
Yeah,
it is important.
That's good. Good word. All right. Anything else from that chapter?
That's good word. Good word.
I was just going to add on page 197. This is just a really quick comment that Greg sort of makes at the top. He says, you do not want to be a steamroller yourself.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say that actually I see a lot of Christians steamroll others.
Yeah.
Because and the reason I see this a lot is because we often do training for like tactics or pro-life apologetics, and then we go out in the street, and I will kind of like stalk pairs of Christians who go out and they're engaging non-Christians, and I'll kind of listen in on their conversations as I kind of walk by.
Yeah.
And I'll hear them, they're so eager to say what they know is true because a person has raised an objection.
Yeah.
They start answering, and they begin to steamroll the non-believer. And I'm like, okay, well, this is just as bad, Yeah. And it could just be, their eagerness is getting the best of them. So I just think it's important that we also see this chapter not as a way to handle somebody who steamrolls us, but also as a mirror for us to see, okay, we got to make sure we're not steamrolling other people as well. Because oftentimes we're so excited to share about Christ or God or this new apologetic tactic we've just learned that we don't let them have an opportunity to carefully and slowly articulate their thoughts, And like what John was saying, just slowing down the conversation allows for that to happen. And I think that's important. That's
a really good point, Alan, especially in light of the fact that we do train Christians, to do this kind of thing and equip them, and they get excited about, asking questions and getting into conversations with people that don't share their views. So, this is important. Of course, this is part of the ambassador model that we teach. Yeah. We're not just trying to give people information, right? It's not like, here is the answers to a test or something. Okay. We care about the person we're talking to. And so it's not just, I'm just going to download this information on you. I'm not just going to, spew it at you as quickly as I can and as forcefully as I can. We're actually trying to dialogue and get into fruitful conversations with people and build relationships. And so that's an important, crucial part of the training. In fact, we call that goes under the character category, right? Knowledge, wisdom, character. That's a real important part of what we do at Stand to Reason and part of our training. All right. Chapter 15. Okay. Chapter 15 called Rhodes Scholar, the Rhodes Scholar tactic. This was an interesting chapter, short, sweet, and I think it trades on some things that we've been covering, that we've kind of already covered. It just applies it. And again, Alan, you've alluded to this. There's a lot of this stuff that we've already kind of covered, like narrating the discussion, where you see it kind of played out in Steamroller, or even taking the roof off. These ideas were kind of already in play in some of the other chapters in the book. And what I see him doing here is trading on our two questions. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And just applying them in a specific situation, right? And so, what do you guys think of the chapter? Takeaways, things you like? You want to go first, Alan?
Sure. So one thing I'll say that's, I guess, somewhat kind of negative here. I think Greg,
don't you like Greg, Alan.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
and why don't you like his books? Does he know this?
What's that?
Does he know you don't like him or his books?
No, I haven't told him to his face yet. I just kind of talk about him behind his back a lot.
No, that is the Christian thing to do.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, but seriously, so he teaches this tactic, Rhodes Scholar, and then his first example is the two faces of science, science as a methodology and science as a philosophy. And then his next one's about the historical Jesus thing. I just don't think pedagogically, those are the two simplest ways to illustrate this tactic right off the bat. I would have saved those for the back end of the chapter. Mm-hmm. There's just so many more easier ways to just illustrate it quickly, just to kind of get people's juices flowing.
Yeah.
So again, if I was ready
to give us one,
what's that?
Can you give us a simple way?
Yeah, a Time magazine headline: "Scientists say there is no soul." The soul does not exist. Scientists say that the soul does not exist. Okay, now they've informed us of their opinion. Really, how did these scientists come to that conclusion? What's their reasoning? So that would be the Rhodes Scholar, right? I mean, that's just a simpler way to do it, and give a whole bunch of illustrations like that. I mean, even when he got to the part about the historical Jesus, I thought he was going to say something as simple as, scholars say, the resurrection didn't happen. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what are the reasons why these scholars suggest that? But he goes into this whole thing about the Christ of faith and the Jesus of history. And I'm like, I get it. It's an accurate application of the tactic. But I just thought pedagogically, it wasn't the way I would teach the material. I would have put that towards the end, But again, if I had written it, it probably wouldn't have been as much of a success. So anyways, those are my two. That was the point that I was going to say wasn't what I liked so much,
Yeah.
Okay, but what I did like was on page 210, when after he talked about bias and worldview bias, he kind of asked the question, well, what about Christianity and the Christian worldview? Don't we have a bias as well? And I really like page 210 because I think it's true that all worldviews come with certain presuppositions, but the difference with the Christian worldview contrasted with, say, naturalism, is that naturalism restricts the number or the types of answers that can possibly be given to explain something, whereas Christianity as a worldview is open to whether it be a natural cause or a personal agent kind of cause, like it seems to me that with naturalism, they're only interested in the right kinds of answers. Whereas with Christianity, we can kind of follow the evidence where it leads. If the evidence points to a natural explanation, then fine, so be it. If the evidence points towards a supernatural explanation, well, then fine, so be it. We can kind of follow the evidence where it leads. And I think it's an important distinction with regards to worldviews and bias and presuppositions that I really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Alan. I thought that's and you just put it really, really well. You should write that in a book. But no, it is. I like just how simple it is. No matter the level of education or the position somebody holds, an opinion is still an opinion. So if it's not based on evidence or facts, then we should take it as opinion. Doesn't matter if you have 3 PhDs. Now, like everything that we've been talking about, this sword cuts both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because the Christian scholar, just because William Lane Craig says something, doesn't mean it's true, right, Tim?
Right.
And
right.
but you go where the evidence leads, and then that goes back into your statement, Alan, that I thought you said really, really well. About worldviews, and worldviews do matter. The Christian worldview avails itself to the application of at least 2 different types of evidence, supernatural and natural. And there are other worldviews that don't avail themselves to that. And I think it handicaps them.
Yeah.
So
I like,
that was good.
I like the way Greg put it. We're talking about an appeal to authority, right? The expert says. And he makes the comment that even expert witnesses are cross-examined, right? Even in the courtroom scene, you don't just call the expert up and then it's game over. They're asked for why they are giving the reasons they're given, right? And this is what we're after. This is what we're looking for. So it's a really good, an important chapter because we are going to authorities all the time. You turn on the news or whatever, and what we want to do is know, well, are these sources accurate? And the way you do that is look at the reasons, not just look at the opinion, not just hear the opinion. So that was good stuff.
Page 204, by the way, where he talks about the expert witness.
Yeah.
Is some wondering.
And he talked about the distinction between bias, which, everybody has a bias, and a bias that distorts, right? And I think this is what you were talking about, Alan. In some cases, you may have a bias that limits what options are available a priori before looking at the evidence, right? And that's something that, again, bias can distort anyone's point of view. So it's something we all need to be aware of. That's good.
That is good.
Any final thoughts?
I'm looking forward to next week.
Why is that?
Because I like just the facts, man.
Okay.
It's fun. But all these chapters, doing this book study the way that we're doing it, has really helped me see that everything builds upon itself. Like Greg, I think, does a great job in the book. Giving you tools that build on the other tools. So it's a really strong tactical plan, a game plan is what he calls it, right? That's laid out in the book. It's really good. I didn't realize that before, because you sit down and you just read, and now having to think a little bit more thoughtfully probably about the content, and then also being more intentional with my reading through it. It's really shown that it builds upon itself. The last chapter leads into the next. Greg's so good at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason why they pay him the big bucks.
Dude, huge bucks.
Huge one. Hey, are we having Greg on next week, or are we going to have him on the week after that?
That's a good question. I'll have to check his schedule. I guess we could. It depends on. I'll have to look at the chapters that we're going to cover.
Well, yeah, I think it makes. Actually, we should probably do it after next week because we still have 4 chapters to cover.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that was the original intent. I think was to have Greg on, and you can give him all your complaints, okay, and how you would have done it differently, Alan.
Yeah, I have a Word document. It's like 20 megabytes.
Good for you. Good for you.
It'll be my last day at work.
Yeah. You'll send that.
Yeah, Alan, thanks for sharing that. Pink slips in the mail.
Yeah, last paycheck. Don't worry about coming into the office anymore.
Right. Keep your COVID distance.
Yeah. That's okay. Funny. Well, it's been fun hanging with you guys. Appreciate it as always. Yes, Abby says, Alan, I would love if you would put your books out in ebook form. I wonder if she's referring to the ambassador guides to homosexuality and the ambassador guides to Islam. Yeah, we sell them as a PDF on the website for a reduced amount. Yeah,
but they're not in ebook, like the technical ebook form, right? Which I think would be like an Amazon Kindle something where they have their own special formatting.
Yeah.
There's no plans to do that. We'll probably just be selling it as a paperback and as a PDF. Oh, it says
everybody should buy those.
Yeah,
both of them.
I didn't get to scan the comments. Did you scan the comments for anything we could respond to?
Well, here's one I just see. Pine Creek says, how often do you guys personally engage with atheists?
Often.
On social media?
Sorry, go ahead, John. What's the context that you do it, John?
Well, I'd like to know, I'd ask him what he means by engage. How often do I put myself in the presence of an atheist is often.
Yeah.
Engage them in this spiritual conversation. Not as often, but my whole family's atheists. So whenever I talk to anybody in my family,
yeah.
And so, but on the same note, my whole family lives on the East Coast still. So we don't get it. I prefer to have these types of conversations face to face, especially with my family. But online, I used to engage all the time. A lot of my friends are atheists. Yeah, I mean, at the law firm, that's one of the things I actually miss probably most about my law firm work, because I was one of the only Christians in the office.
Yeah.
I can think of maybe one or two others in the office that were outwardly Christian, and I was certainly the only one that would want to discuss my worldview with people. And I really miss those conversations with my atheist coworkers.
Yeah.
So, but quite often.
So, John, are you saying we need to hire more atheists at Stand to Reason?
Absolutely. That'd be tricky agreeing to the statement of faith, but
that's right.
But who cares, really? No. I think what I am saying is I think it'd be good if we got outside of our Christian bubbles more.
Yeah. And it looks like, and Doug is agreeing. He's saying face to face is the way to go, and that's what the tactical approach that we've been talking about is kind of designed for face to face. I think there would have to be another book written for online tactics. It would be a different approach.
Right? So hard.
Yeah.
Online conversations are so hard and I'm just, when I used to engage I don't really engage very much online anymore. Yeah. Because what I found myself doing, and this is just anecdotal. This is just my experience, is I would spend quite a bit of time fashioning and writing a response to somebody And then the response back to me would be the equivalent of "nuh-uh," and I'm like, I really do want to engage. I don't want to believe what I believe if it's not true, so I'm open to hearing you out, and I just want to be honest and have a good conversation. But online, it's really hard, especially when it goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? The audience often that we're addressing isn't the audience that's being affected.
Sure.
Which is actually one thing about online. I used to get emails from people out of the blue that I hadn't talked to in years. A woman who used to babysit me, and I was the worst kid. I mean, if you had to, I was the worst kid. And anyways, now she like follows me on social media, and she emailed me out of the blue just saying, "Thank you so much. I've become a Christian. Thank you so much for engaging online, because I'm watching and I'm taking notes and stuff, which is good. But online discussions are so hard. They're so hard."
How about this question here? Yami says, "Why is it so hard to talk with family about the gospel?" John, do you want to say something about this? I know that you use, you take many opportunities to share the gospel with your family.
Yeah.
But it is harder, isn't it? Or do you think do you see a difference?
I think, I mean, just honestly, I don't know if it is for me. Hard. I think it's hard to break that ice and start the conversation sometimes, but I think it's due to maybe an expectation we place on ourselves. Remember, going back to earlier what Greg said in the tactics, and it's just true, is remember that not everybody is a harvester, we're gardeners as well. Don't shoulder too much. Don't feel too much pressure. I find that my Christian worldview informs just about every area of my life. So I find myself talking about Jesus to everybody, not in a weird way, but I do just as I talk to him about everything else. I don't have a favorite sports team, really. I don't follow any of that stuff, but I love theology and apologetics and philosophy and that kind of stuff. So these things are part of life, and just bringing them up in normal conversation isn't. I think we make it difficult.
Yeah,
but it's not.
Yeah.
I also wonder if the question. I mean, your answer was fine. I was thinking that I wonder if the question also he meant by that was like, why is it so hard for family to be persuaded by ideas? Because oftentimes it seems like, you could say you could be having two conversations that are identical, one with a non-family person, one with a family person, but the person who's not family will respond almost with more respect or maybe consider your views more. Whereas if they're family, they almost automatically discount you. I'm not sure if that's what they were meant by the question, but I find that it's the case, at least in the cases where I've had to talk with my family about things. And it just seems like when they're your family, they just sort of discount you because they're like, well, it's just Alan, and Alan's just, we know Alan and he doesn't have any vision like yours. Well, I don't know, whatever,
But then he gets out in the public, like, that is Mr. Shlemon.
Yeah.
Mr. Shlemon over there. Mr. Shlemon.
No, that's not what I meant. But no, so I often tell people then, because people come to me all the time and say, Alan, it's like, I have my brother, I try to share the gospel with him and he won't listen at all. And so I just tell him, look, continue to be faithful to present the gospel or share with your brother whenever you have an opportunity. That's one thing. So continue whenever you have an opportunity. But number two, and pray for them. Okay. But specifically what I tell them to pray for is pray that some other believer who's not a family member will come into their lives and maybe share the gospel or share the truth with them. And sometimes that can be more effective than them listening to you, So I always pray that a committed Christian would come into my family member's life and share the very thing that I would want to share with them, because oftentimes they'll consider that other person more than they'll consider it when it's coming from me. So that's kind of how strategically I pray in those instances, or I encourage people who ask that kind of a question, to pray.
Yeah. In line with what you're saying, Patty says something about a prophet in his hometown, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Patty's right.
That's good stuff. Yeah, that's good, man. This was a great comment from Alan. Family, you care what they think about you, and you want to be accepted by them. That's certainly a factor that could play a role, right?
Yeah.
In those kinds of conversations, you're going into it with certain expectations, where when it's a stranger or someone you don't know so well, you may not have those expectations or really care what they think about you. Well, I mean, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. You have nothing to lose. It's like you're not going to lose a relationship.
That's right. You may not ever see them again.
But if you're speaking to your family about Christian things in a way that you're fearful of losing the relationship, then I'd suppose that you'd want to think about how you're talking about these things in the first place. Then,
yeah, and I think you're right.
I haven't ever been fearful that my family would cut off relationship with me. I mean, I know that in certain circumstances they'd rather I not be there, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I
think it's important.
Tim, just before you, like, one thing that I find, me personally, my family has seen the change in me. So it's almost like they expect it. They expect me to talk about the gospel with them, because they've seen me before Jesus, and now they see me with Jesus. So it actually, that has, I think, lent an air of credibility to it when I do want to talk about it, because they've seen the changes in my life. So anyways, what were you going to say, Tim?
I was going to say that sometimes, we can be weird, or Christians can be weird in those conversations. And it's like, and this goes back to what you said, John. You can have these conversations and have them naturally come up, and just by asking questions and this kind of thing, the gardening style. You don't have to, be talking about, the hockey game, and then I make a joke about this when I give talks, how the goalie had a shutout, was making this save and that save, and that reminds me of how Jesus saved you from your sins, and have this weird, awkward transition, and so your family hopefully doesn't see you as this weirdo who's going to force that conversation into every conversation, right? So I think that's another aspect of this whole thing.
That's good, Tim.
Yeah. So there's lots of good stuff here. And there's a lot of stuff that I can't read all these things, but I'm seeing, Doug was making lots of comments here, and we appreciate him jumping in and hanging out with us for, 60 minutes or whatever it's been. And that's great. I keep pronouncing about wrong. Listen, that's the Canadian accent coming out, and I'm not changing it for anyone. Greg gives me a hard time about that. I'm going to keep using the word about in every sentence I can, so that you can keep hearing it. Are you guys just used to it? Or Alan, are you just used to it now?
Well, I have a couple Canadian friends, so I'm used to it, but I still notice it. Like it still comes out, and I'm like, I can hear it. Yeah.
So it's like when I hear,
I said it doesn't register. It does register.
Because it registers for me when I hear John, and it's only certain times when he starts talking about the ba, like, and sometimes he says bar one way, and then he'll say ba and ka, and it's weird. It's like, John, you go into this Boston mode at times. It's like, and you flow into it, and you just flow right out of it. Can you explain that?
It's all fake. I fake it all. It's all make believe. No, I don't know. My Rihanna says the same thing. It's usually when I get excited, or when I get upset, or when I'm super relaxed, like when I'm really comfortable. But it's. I remember when so when I first started preaching, when I became a pastor, I tried really, really hard to lose it, because I remember one time I was preaching a really hard message, and I was talking about like sin, and man, I forget what I said, but I said something with the accent, and like half the audience started giggling. In like the middle of my drive, I'm driving it home.
You're
And
calling people to repentance, and they're just giggling.
He said, "Joe." And I was like, "Oh man, I gotta lose this thing. Like this isn't gonna work." But I don't know. I notice it when you say stuff, but who am I to complain about accents?
There you go. Well, it looks like we had a couple of friendly accents in there. Anyways, it looks like Samuel, he lived close enough to Canada to hear it. And I think maybe Doug might be Canadian too. He says, I still say sorry the Canadian way. So it sounds like he's Canadian too. So I got
How's the Canadian say sorry?
I got a friendly out there. That's great. Oh, he says, I've been in the US for over 20 years, but when I talk fast, the Canadian accent comes out. Well, there you go. You can't take the Canadian out of the Canadian. There you go. All right, guys. It's over an hour. Let's call it quits. Again, guys, we appreciate you joining us. Next week, we're going to take on the end of the book, chapters 16 to 19, 4 chapters. And then it looks like we're going to try to get Greg for session 7, so 2 weeks from now. And that'll just be, we'll just ask him questions about the book. Maybe you can fill in some gaps or something. We'll have some fun with Greg. And so until then, God bless and take care.
You guys, see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Love you.